guys, I'm Nate with BYU Photo, and I get asked a lot how I edit my photos, how I tone them in Photoshop. So today we're going to go through and I'm going to show you a few things that I do. There's no right or wrong way to edit your photos. Well, there could be a wrong way to edit your photos, but I'm going to show you a few things that I do, and hopefully those tips will help out. And so take what you like and see if you can incorporate it, and if not, get rid of the stuff that you don't like. So let's jump in and see what we have. So I have 4 photos picked out. This one of basketball, a campus shot, and then one from when I was in Samoa, and then from a dancing scene. So I'm gonna select all of these, open them up into Photoshop. Okay, so right now I usually have these on to show my highlights and my shadows where they're getting clipped, just so I kind of know where I'm at. So starting with this one, very first thing that I usually do when I'm editing a photo is one of our graphic designers, he refers to it as stretching the taffy. So I'll take my highlights and I'll go down and I'll bring my shadows up. I do that to give the image a little bit more dynamic range, and then I crunch the contrast a little bit. The other thing I'll do in a situation like this is I will bump up the clarity a little bit. Another thing that I'll do is I will take my adjustment brush. So up here, you can hit the letter K or you can click on it. I'm going to bring my exposure up to about 70. And then I'm just going to click on him. So one thing to remember as the photographer and as the editor is you are the director of this image. And so you are guiding people to look where you want them to look without letting them know. So if there's something that is distracting, you need to eliminate that distraction somehow. And there will be different scenarios where we'll go over how to go about doing that. So the first way that I do that in this situation is with my adjustment brush. I'll brighten up that part of the image there. Also, one thing that's very important to do in your images, you can hit this button up here or hit the letter A to straighten your horizon. No crooked horizons that are unintentional. And if you could see the raw files, I seem to my arms are, I don't know, maybe I'm just too strong with my left or weak on my right, or I don't know, maybe it's the other way. So I kind of shoot a little off, so I'm doing that a lot. But there's no excuse for this one because it was on a remote. So maybe I just see crooked. All right, the other thing that I like to do in a situation like this, my ISO is a little high, 3200. So up here, there's the Luminance tab. So to see exactly what the Luminance does, I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. See, you can see the digital noise from the high ISO. So you drag your Luminance up, we'll go extreme first. See how it just really smooths it out? We'll turn that off. Really smooths it out. You obviously don't want the image to look fake and plastic, so keep your luminance levels down. So depending on what my ISO is at, I'll play around between, let's say around the 20s, mid 20s. If I'm up to 10,000 ISO, then usually I'll go maybe about halfway, roughly, depending. You just don't want to go overboard on it. So we'll keep it around the 20s there. All right, so from here, we'll go back. We'll bring my blacks in a little bit, turn these indicators back on. Give it a little bit more black in there. So the difference between vibrance and saturation is mainly, from my understanding, it's your skin tones. So if you want your skin tones to remain somewhat natural, use vibrance, where it'll affect all of the other colors except for the skin tones. If you use saturation, your skin tones they'll go crazy. They will also be included in that slider. So I'm going to bring my vibrance here up just a little bit. All right, we're going to add a little bit of vignetting. The other way you can kind of keep the eyes contained in the image instead of going off to the sides. I'm going to bring in just a little vignetting. Nothing too extreme, but just enough to keep your eyes in. Bring my shadows up a little bit more, maybe up on the exposure a little bit. Check my highlights. And from there, I think we're good. All right, now we're going to move to a campus photo. This one looks a little underexposed, and for me that was intentional because I'm shooting for the highlights in the sky. I love the texture, I love the colors, and I'm going to show you why I intentionally underexposed this image. So first thing, I'm going to hit A, I'm going to straighten my horizon. So I'm just going to find something that's level, fix my horizon. All right, and then again, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch that taffy. So I'm going to bring my highlights down, I'm going to bring my shadows up. A little bit of contrast. To me, I still want the foreground a little bit brighter, so I'm going to bump up my exposure a little bit. Okay, now this is where some of the magic happens. I don't know if any of you guys have photographed with graduated filters, where you actually put a filter in front of your lens and it's 1 to 2 stops, whatever difference, or half stop, where you can bring down the exposure of your sky. Well, you can do that digitally in here. So up in this corner, or up on the top, there's a graduated filter. Click that, and I'm just going to bring the exposure down just over a stop, so you can kind of restore the color in the sky there, maybe even a little bit more. And then just for fun, I'm going to add a little bit of warmth to it. Maybe bring the saturation in that sky up a little bit. So you bring in the clouds and the colors of the sky again. So at this point up here, this is where the gradient starts, and then this is where it ends. So you can have a really hard line, or you can go to a gradual soft line. And you can move that, all around. You could even do one from the bottom up if you wanted to, but I don't. All right, I'm gonna bring in a little bit of saturation in this image, just to make it pop a little bit more. And for me, we talked about earlier, as the director of this image, you are trying to get people to look where you want them to look and eliminate any other distractions. For me, this big white patch of snow is kind of a distraction. So I'm going to crop that in a little bit. So you're eliminating that distraction before there was a bright white spot. You could have burned that down or dropped the exposure there. But I'm just going to crop it out because it's giving me information that's not necessarily needed. And if it doesn't add to the photo, then you can take it out and it's not going to hurt the photo. For me, it was more of a distraction, so we get rid of it. As a side note, this is a pet peeve of mine. I despise being forced cropping into certain ratios, like an 8:10. Our cameras do not shoot in that ratio. Our cameras shoot in a 2:3 ratio. But you go to the stores and all they have are like 8:10 frames. Well, that goes back to the film days, right? We're shooting digital now. Our ratios are different. It's hard to find an 8:12 frame. Plus, honestly, who frames their images anymore? A lot of the stuff that we do is all online, so nobody cares if it's an 8:10 photo. So my suggestion is, and what I like to do, unless we need to specifically crop an 8:10, crop it according to what the image demands. Right? If the image looks better at a crop that's a weird ratio, then do that. Unless you're printing it for a specific purpose, if it's just going online, crop it to what works best for the image. All right, so I'm going to bring my blacks in just a little bit. I need to turn these back on. Blacks in just a little bit, and then shadows up, highlights down just a little bit more. And we'll change the color temperature just a little bit. One thing to look for, especially with tree branches, is chromatic aberration. So you can see kind of the greens and then the magentas on those tree branches. Okay, that is something we definitely need to get rid of. Luckily here, we have something in the lens corrections that does that for us. There's other ways that you can do it, and in the past we had to do it differently. But this, click remove chromatic aberration, and they're pretty much gone. You can go in manually. Let's say you see a little bit of purple in there. Crank that up a little bit. You see a huge difference with that purple gone. Just cleans up those branches really nice. Green, same thing. Now your chromatic aberration is gone. We're also going to be talking about how to sharpen your image in a couple different ways. I've read people on both sides of the fence and the way that they like to sharpen. So I'm going to show you two different ways. You can kind of pick which you like. So we'll go over on a spot where we can see a little bit better. So up here you can actually just sharpen in here. Sharpen your amount, and you can see if you go extreme. With anything in Photoshop that you're learning, especially if you're learning something new, my advice is to always dial it back 50%. So think about your first time in Photoshop and you were playing with filters and you were using like the posterization filter or like, I don't know, the liquify, I don't know, any of those filters where it was just way over the top. You look at your images and you're like, what was I thinking? So my advice is anytime you find something new, dial it back 50%, ask for other people's feedback, because we get pretty excited about learning new things. Sharpening could be one of those things. Don't go overboard. You don't want it to look fake. You don't want it to look too sharp. So just a little bit. You want to be subtle with our editing. So bring the radius detail, and then if you with your masking, if you hold down your option key and click on your masking, it'll show you where that sharpening is being applied and where it is not. So you can just get the spots where the lines are, where it's the highest contrast, or you can actually sharpen your whole image. So to go extreme, kind of show you what that looks like with your masking. So now it's just going on the lines, right? It's just adding more contrast on those lines where you can kind of dial that back, sharpen your whole image. All right. So moving on to our next image. Okay, so here's a photo that I took in Samoa. We're going to talk about how to do a black and white photo. So from here, again, as the director of the image, you want people to focus on one area. So where is our area of focus here? Obviously, the child looking up at this girl who's using the stethoscope to check his heart. So as we go through this, we'll show you how to keep our focus there. So I'm going to add my contrast. I'm going to bring my highlights down. I'm going to bring my shadows up a little bit, maybe a little bit more contrast. The other thing you can do to help direct people's attention there, I'm going to drop my exposure down quite a bit. Make it a little bit darker. And then I'm going to grab my adjustment brush again. So I'm just going to click on his face. So you're brightening up this part of the image while darkening the rest. The other thing, you can convert it to black and white here, or you can do it actually in Photoshop. I think from here, we will, let's open up our shadows a little bit more. Let's go into Photoshop. Hit F on your keyboard to go full screen, for those that don't know that trick. And then Command 0 to go full screen within that screen. All right, so from here, I'm going to convert to black and white. All right, so up here, you can play around with the colors that are actually in your image still, even though it's black and white. So with his skin tones, with reds, you know, yellows. So I just like to play around with it. You don't want to go too extreme. If you look back here, you get some kind of weird posterization. Just a little bit. And you can go extreme so you can see what it affects. Again, my purpose is to draw all of our attention right here. So the other thing that I'm going to do to help that out is I'm going to do a curves layer. I'm going to drop that down. And then I'm going to get my brush. I'm going to hit B for brush. If you hold down Control and Option, you can change the size of your brush. So click and drag while you're holding down Control and Option. And then your hardness, you can drag up and down and it will do the hardness of your brush. So I'm going to put my hardness on 0. And then if you look over here with your colors, on your mask, remember, white reveals, black conceals. So I want to conceal what I did. So I'll hit this arrow, or you can hit the X on your keyboard and it flips those back and forth. So I want to lighten him back up. Maybe a little too dark over here. Lighten this up a little bit. Down here, lighten that up. Just to keep the texture in there. So you can see the difference right there. See how even just doing that, your eyes are drawn to him instead of the rest of the background. So looking here, a lot of the practice that we'll sometimes have our students do, or that I do quite commonly, is to look at the image and like squint my eyes so it's just more of a blur. And then you can see just value. You can see what's really bright, what's not. So you can see where your eye is getting pulled away from. So if I were to squint my eyes right now, and we can mimic that. Let's go up to filter and let's do a blur gallery. So we're going to blur this image quite a bit. Okay, with this image blurred, pretend your eyes are squinting right now. So where's the brightest parts of this image? Obviously right up here, over here, a little bit behind him, these areas here, and then right here. So these are areas that are distracting from his face. So that's a good way to be able to tell if you need to dodge and burn or darken some areas or lighten some areas. So we'll hit cancel. And I created a new layer down here. You can click and drag to the new layer there, or I just hit Command J and it just duplicates the layer. Turn our curves back on. And I'm going to go over here. We're going to go to the burn tool. And I just want to affect the highlights, right? I'm going to keep my exposure pretty low. Again, holding down Option and Control, make this a little bit bigger. I want to keep my exposure low. I think we talked about that. And then I'm just gonna darken that down a little bit. Just a few clicks here and there. Again, just subtle, nothing too extreme. Because we want our focus on him. So then you can see just the small difference that makes in keeping our eye contained there. All right, the very next thing I'll do is I will do my levels. I want to set my black levels and I want to set my white levels. So here I'm going to click, or I'm going to hit Option and then click, and then it shows me exactly where my blacks are, my pure blacks are. So I'm going to click and drag that to about where I want it, and then I'm going to do my whites as well. So you can see right there on his nose, right here is pure white. So I'm going to take that down just a little bit. Now what I'm going to do again is I'm going to get my brush and I am going to conceal adjustments that I made. There was a lot of black in her hair, so I'm just going to conceal a little bit there, just to not completely make it pure black. And then just a little bit on his face with the whites, just so they're not blown out. So you can see a little bit of a difference with the levels, makes it pop just a little bit more. Okay, now we're going to talk about one more way to sharpen your image. So you can actually do the sharpen filter or sharpening in Camera Raw, or you can do what's called a high pass filter. So I'm going to duplicate this, Command J, filter, other, high pass. Okay, the trick with high pass is you do not, again, you don't want to go extreme. You want to keep this relatively low. Rarely will I go above, I don't know, probably 2. I probably keep it between 1 and 2 most of the time. You can zoom in and just kind of see where it's affecting. So I think we'll do, yeah, about a 1/6, call it good. And then we will change our blending mode to overlay. Now you can see, turning it on and off, it's subtle, but you can see it sharpens your image a little bit. I don't know the exact science or algorithm behind it. I know when you use the Sharpen tool, it just adds contrast in the pixels on those lines. This, I believe it has to do something with the high frequency. I don't know. Personally, personal preference, I like the way the high pass looks better, but I know a lot of people like the way that your Sharpen works. So it's, again, personal preference. All right, so here's the finished image. And then we will move back to our last image. So now here we are at this dancing image. Well, it doesn't look like he's dancing. Contemporary dance. Looks like he's breaking his neck. So another side note, in a situation like this, man, I am not a dancer. Ask my wife. I am far from a dancer. So in a situation like this, I think it's important to leverage the knowledge that people have in their particular field. There is no way that I could have set this up on my own. I couldn't have said, hey, I want you to like roll on the ground and make it look like you're breaking your neck. I wouldn't have even thought of that. And so this is where, you know, using the student was really important. The director of the dance program kind of helping out with the direction there, and really leveraging their skill set. As university photographers, I feel sometimes we're supposed to be experts in everything when, at least myself, I'm not. I know nothing about dancing. I know relatively little about science, different kinds of research, math. I was an art major, right? So what do you expect from me? I understand how to use the camera. Relatively speaking, I understand lighting. I still don't know. I still feel like I'm making it up most of the time, and I get lucky. So in a situation like this, yeah, use people who know what they're doing. Don't be afraid to ask them for what they think would be good, because we don't always know, and it's okay to not know what we're doing in situations. Our job is to understand the camera, understand the lighting, and then involve them in the creative process. So anyway, back to the photo. First thing, as I mentioned before, I don't know if it's because I photographed with just one shoe on, but my horizon is crooked. So I'm gonna fix that. All right, again, I'm gonna stretch that taffy, or however he says it. Again, you gotta go based on the image, and however the phone rings, it'll kind of guide you in your direction. Our students will get that. One of the benefits of having students also is they'll answer the phone for you. All right, so I don't want as many shadows here, so I'm gonna bring that down just a little bit. You know, contrast, clarity, I'm gonna bring that up a little bit. It's really harsh lighting, so I kind of want it to be a grittier feel in the image. So I'm gonna bring my clarity up, maybe vibrance a little bit, just make those blues and browns pop just a little bit more. And that's probably all I would do to this image. Maybe bring my blacks down a little bit. So right now, you'll notice, even though this looks white, it is not white. So let's open this image into Photoshop. So let's say this image is going to be used by a graphic designer. So we can go over now how you would turn the background pure white. Even though it looks white, it's not. And I'll show you that it's not in just a little bit. First thing that I will do, again, there's a million ways to do this stuff. This is just one way that I do it. I'll grab my lasso tool and I am going to just do a really quick outline on him and his shadow. And my lines do not need to be straight. So now I'm going to invert my selection, which is Command-Shift-I. So now I'm selecting everything out here instead of just him, or you can go up to Select and Inverse Selection. So from here, I'm going to hit Shift F5, which is Edit Fill, and I'm going to do it pure white. So now you can see my white that I thought was white is actually not white. The other way you can tell is if you do a curves layer. I use a curves layer a lot just so I can see my highlights and shadows. If it's a high key image, I'll bring it down a lot. If it's a low key image, I'll raise it up so I can see what's black and what's not. This is really important, at least when I'm editing photos, because a lot of times you may print something or it'll be shown on a different screen and you'll be editing something that you think is black or you think is white in the background, and then it gets put on another screen that's either not calibrated or that is calibrated and yours isn't. And it may reveal stuff that you are horrified that people see, like your cloning job is just awful. So I use my curves layer to be able to help me see in the shadows or in the highlights to make sure that it's clean. And then when I'm done with it, I just throw it away. I throw the curves layer away. I don't throw the image away. All right, so we're gonna bring that down. Again, there's probably a million ways to do it. You can, hand cut them out, or you can use the Smart Selection tool. This is just the way that I prefer to do it. So I'm actually going to go to my Dodge tool, and again, I just want highlights. I'll keep my exposure around 19, maybe a little bit lower. I'm going to zoom in, bring that up. So now it's only going to affect my highlights, which is nice. If I turn this off, you can see if I use my Dodge here on the shadows, it does not do anything. I gotta like really rub into it before you start to see anything going on. But if I do it on the highlights, you can see it affects it a lot quicker. But on here, it's gonna really take care of it. So to preserve those edges, I'm just gonna paint right along those edges. And then again, if you have trouble seeing, that's what your curves layer's for. So then you can see exactly where you're getting it. So we may fast forward through this just so you're not bored watching me do it. Now you want to be careful on the edges where there are highlights so you don't blow them out as well. So in a situation like that, I'm going to make the brush size smaller. And on the shadow side, you can paint right over it. It's not going to affect it. Not much anyways. All right, turn my curved layer off. There's our image. I'm going to delete that layer because I have no need for it anymore. And again, I'm going to finish it off by levels. So I'm going to set my blacks where I want them, just a little bit. And then I'm going to set my whites, and that'll kind of clean up the edges. And then you can also play with your midtones if you want to fill in those shadows a little bit more. It'll keep your blacks and your whites set, and then you can just move around the midtones to wherever you like it. I'm going to bring a little bit more shadows up there. And then that's it. So hope this was helpful. Again, take what you like and run with it if it helps. And for things that you have a better way of doing it, then keep doing that. In fact, if you have a better way to do something than I was just showing you, I would love for you to show me. I'm always about being more efficient with my editing and making things better. So if there's something that you like to do that you feel works better, email us at photo@byu.edu and please let us know. Otherwise, good luck, and I don't know how to end this.